Beautiful. Okay, so it's recording now. Good. Everyone's aware. All right. So, has everyone had a chance to look at the assignment?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see. All right. So the first question is, what was it like to hear people tell you things regarding social identities that you didn't know about yourself? Does anyone want to go first?
Give me 1 second. I'm just trying to open my other
Okay,
document.
you're good. I can go first while you're opening.
Go for it.
I had done this activity. I'm sure you all have in, like, a couple other classes.
Oh, wait. Hold on, Samantha. I don't want to interrupt you. I'm sorry, but it would be helpful if all of us who aren't talking mute ourselves so then we can hear you better.
Yes.
So.
And I think you just press the microphone at the bottom. Perfect. Okay, so we're supposed to talk for 3 minutes. I'll get as close as I can to that. I had done this activity for a couple other classes, but this time we were really asked to look at our identities, which was something a little bit different. I think before, like, it really was just like who you are. Not, I mean, I guess it always has to do with your identities, but it seemed a little bit different this time. It was not like terribly difficult to hear what other people knew about me that I didn't know about myself, just because, like I said, I've done the activity before. But once they said what they knew about me that I didn't know about myself, I was like, yeah, you're actually right. Like, I do that. So, like, one thing they talked about was when race is brought up as a topic, I often quickly will change the subject, or I will, like, quickly start defending how I'm not racist. And that's one thing that, like, I've been pretty interested in like this class, is that, like, what the idea of racism is, because I think, like, I grew up learning not really what racism was, but just, like, racism wasn't really what I thought it was. So now that I have, like, a different understanding of what racism is, that was really interesting for me to hear, because I was, like, thinking back on conversations and I was like, yeah, I do that a lot. So for me, it was, like, eye-opening, but at the same time, I was able to reflect and be like, yeah, you're right. I do that stuff. So since I've had those conversations, I've been a little more socially aware of those things. And right now, like, race is a big topic in the school corporation I teach in, because we've had a lot of acts of racism lately. So being at a school that is predominantly white, a lot of teachers, like, jump to that, like, we're not racist. And now I'm able to have a better conversation about that, especially since these things were brought up to me. So, like, it made me feel kind of bad, but then I was like, now that I'm aware that I do these things, I can better stop that. So it was hard in that sense, but I feel like just because of other classes, I've become, like, really accustomed to hearing about stuff that I don't know about myself. So I don't know how long that was, probably like 2 minutes. What else did I say? They also told me that while I identify as an ally for the LGBTQ community, they often see that I struggle with communicating with my transgender students. And I would say, like, that was probably the hardest for me to hear, because I do identify as an ally for the LGBTQ plus community. And I really do try to communicate with those students, like, effectively. And, like, I had a student today that is going through a transition, and he feels very open talking to me. But from an outsider's view, they can, like, tell that I still feel slightly uncomfortable. And I think, like, just exposing myself to that more has helped. But everything they told me, while hard to hear, was like, okay, these are all fixable things, not like I'm the worst human being in the world. Like, these can all be fixed through like being cognizant that they're happening. So yeah, that's all I've got on that one.
That's good. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I can go next if that's okay. Okay, it was very interesting actually to ask some friends, and I asked some people that it's a little closer so they know my journey and they interact with me a lot. Mostly like peers from work. One of my friends that I actually work with and live with, she actually brought a situation up that came up today. I have to share something about excellence and professionalism at our meeting. And she was mentioning that a lot of the time I assume given identities or qualities, in like kind of to avoid diving in and processing true pieces of that specific identity. For example, today I was talking the Enneagram. Like, I identify with these things about the Enneagram, just being a perfectionist and things like that I identify deeper with. But she was like, you use the Enneagram instead of explaining deeper some things that have impacted this specific piece of identity. I don't know if this makes sense. I'm rumbling all over the place, but kind of just using a lot of the time like general topics, a general theme, instead of diving deeper and just avoiding it. Without making it seem like I'm avoiding it, I use kind of like a bigger word, a bigger theme, instead of going deeper into that. So that was like interesting. I had never heard that from someone. So it's like pretty cool that she was able to be honest in that, and definitely like just the trust piece with this person that was talking to me. And other one will be especially a lot with, I was talking to one of my other coworkers, and they brought up that I am Afro-Ecuadorian, but a lot of the time that's not an identity that somebody can just like easily tell. I will be more identified as a Latino. So there were like a lot of the time when people doesn't assume that identity, like you seem very defensive or immediately will bring it up, but in a defensive way, instead of just kind of sitting with people and walking them through your identity, that you identify as Afro-Ecuadorian, although that might not be an assumed identity. So that was another interesting thing. It was awesome to hear from people that I trust because it was easier to receive. But it was very interesting to be like, oh, these are things that I could actually grow in and learn more about, and why do I do that? And kind of like with the first aspect of it, just like diving deeper into things that are part of my identity, but I don't want to necessarily run away or avoid it. I think those were a couple of the main ones that came up with asking people. But yeah, that's all I have. That was really fast, but that's all I got.
Thanks for sharing. Well, both of you too. Thanks for sharing. I'm good for going next, or either way. All right. So like Samantha, I've done this exercise before, but I thought it was actually kind of interesting because I did it, it was like 2 years ago. And so when I talked to other people, I went back to some of the same people to kind of to see if they would say the same thing, especially because it's another person who's in student affairs, so has done this exercise. So, and I trust her a lot. And I was just really interested if she would like say the same stuff, because I know she doesn't remember what she said before or what. And basically, one of the big main things was in the past, similarly, like you said, Samantha, I was very uncomfortable talking about race. During this time when I was first doing this assignment, like I had just been thrown into like running a diversity and equity center at a college campus that had never had one. And I'd read a textbook about teaching diversity and equity, and that was all the training they gave me. So I was like, I need to go through this whole process of like identity development and understanding mind before I start teaching it. And that was right during the time when I was first doing this Johari window, and talking about race was a big one that I was just like not comfortable with. I can talk about white privilege and things like that, but just not race. And so I went back to the same friend, and that was one of the things that she brought up without me even saying, is that it's something that I've become more comfortable with because I acknowledge like what I don't know and don't understand, and don't try to put my story on anybody, and just really focus on the listening aspect of it. And when it's coming to race, and just really be upfront about what I don't know and what I'm not comfortable with. And so she really focused on the fact that it's still obviously something I'm uncomfortable with, but I acknowledge that, and I want to learn more and become comfortable with talking about race. So I thought that was really cool. That demonstrated something that I needed to work on a couple of years ago, and that I've made progress with. The other thing that when I talked to a couple of people that I didn't do this with before, they brought up with the fact, like, they've seen me talk about like identity and identity development with my students, and some topics like are hard to talk about, or some people just don't understand, like pronouns or privilege and topics like that. And they said that I'm way more patient and understanding when I'm talking to my students and explaining it to my students, but I get extremely agitated and frustrated when I'm talking to family or friends, and I'm less patient with them and understanding that. And I don't know, that just made me, well, first of all, I felt a little bit bad, but they're like, you're just very unopen. You're like, you just come across as like, this is right and you're wrong, and trying to explain like why pronouns are important and why you may not understand it, but this is where someone else is coming from. And so that really kind of made me realize, like, okay, I need to kind of come with the same approach if I'm talking to family and friends about some of these controversial, I guess, topics that sometimes people don't understand why they are so important. So yeah, I feel like I just talked really fast, but those were the two main things that I felt like came from talking to other people regarding like social identities and what they kind of observed of me. Your turn.
All right. Thank you for sharing, everybody. For me, like everybody, I've done this before, but the interesting thing about this time is I actually just met new people, and so I got the opportunity to see what things that stayed the same, what things were different, and we didn't really focus on race. It was more so me, I guess, socially and how I interact with people versus how I interact with my students. And I know one main thing that everybody said was that I tend to listen to respond, but not listen to understand. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people, I can space out because I'm focusing on what I want to say back to them, and basically miss important information because I'm trying to respond. And I can see where I've actually done it with my students as well. They would begin to say something before I can even finish. I'll just jump in and say what I feel like they were going to say versus waiting until they get it all out. And I guess I can see where it'll be frustrating for my students and for, I guess, the adults that I interact with. Something else that we focus on was the fact that while I am outspoken, I'm also extremely mindful of the way that how do I say it? I'm mindful of how I say things because I don't want to offend people. And so what ends up happening is often I will just fade into the background and not really express myself And then it just builds up until it just reaches a boiling point, and then at that point, it's just a big blow up. I think I talked too short, but that's it.
Thanks for sharing that. I think the timing is not super important. Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way, but I think we're probably good if we just. I know we were all pretty worried about that, but did anyone have anything to say based on what people said, like about the four of us? So, like, add anything? Because I know we're supposed to listen, but did anyone have anything to add before we move on?
I just want to say thanks for sharing. It's pretty cool to get to know you guys a little more. I think it makes more sense to do like discussion posts with knowing people a little better than just like this person like posting, you know? So it's helpful. I really appreciate you guys sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is like the one class that we haven't like really met people per se, and I'm like, we're talking about very deep things, and I know like 3 or 4 people, so it's nice to like put a face to the name other than like your little icon picture. So
yeah, it does take a lot to share. I feel like they're very deeper and personal questions. I'm like, oh gosh, do I have to share this? But it's great. It allows me to get to know you guys, so it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we all are in a very vulnerable place, so we're there together.
Yeah,
for sure. All right. So the next question, we kind of already talked about it, but if anyone wanted to add anything, did anything someone said about you surprise you? For me, once I thought about what they said, not really. I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I do that. So it didn't really surprise me. I think in the moment it caught me off guard because I wanted to like go on the defense. Like, I don't do that. I don't do that. But once I thought it, I was like, yeah, I actually do that. So, nothing really shocked me though.
I don't think I have ever explicitly asked this question to any people or friends. So it was definitely surprising to hear like, oh, people is actually willing to be very raw and honest about this. And really that's where grow can come out of. If I know there's areas that I'm like, I never knew I was defensive about like the expectation of you knowing what my race identity is, you know? So I think definitely like surprising to see how honest people can be if I'm willing to ask those questions, those hard questions.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think like I was like, oh wait, that's not me. I'm not doing that intentionally. Why am I doing that? Don't take it that way. Like instantly wanted to be like defensive, which because it's not my intention to like come off that way or to do these things. But once again, now I'm aware of it. So
did anything surprise you, Madarian?
Oh no, not at all. Everything that they said was 100% true. So yeah.
I think we all kind of feel that same way. Okay, next question. Based on what people told you, what is an area you're committed to doing more work around? All right, so I'll go first again. I think what I'm really committed to like doing more work to improve on is just my interaction with people that are unlike me. I really do like to think like I'm really great at that because as I've said in some of my like reflective journals, I was raised like in a military family, so like surrounded by people that were very different than me. Like the first 10 years of my life, I didn't live in America because we were stationed, my dad was stationed other places. So I thought that I brought like this very like diverse, positive outlook and interacting with a ton of people. And I think like compared to some of my peers, that is 100% true. Like I currently live in a small Midwest town that majority white, majority Christian, very typical like when you think Midwest, that like what you're picturing is where I live. And it's very different than how I grew up. So it's almost like my surroundings have affected me in that way. So I think just like being more cognizant of how I interact with people that are different than me, whether that be race, gender, religion, whatever that might be, but just trying to be more cognizant of that and thinking about it, and trying to like not like Marion said, like he would think about what he's going to say before he says it or while they're talking. And I find myself doing it as well. So like actively listening, like I teach my students how to actively listen. I'm like, look at them. Don't be doing other things. Listen to what they're saying so you can respond. But for me, I find that I do the same thing. I like already have thought of what I'm going to say. So I really think just like my interaction with people is something that I really want to work at, because like being in the profession we're all going towards, in my current profession of education, I interact with people that are different than me all the time. And I'm really more aware now that maybe those interactions aren't super positive. I'm not doing it on purpose, which I think is like what I think is why I was surprised. But just like being more conscious of like, and no one's ever told me they're offended, so I don't really know if people are offended by the way I talk to them or not. I'll have like one session student that's like, well, that offended me, but normally it's just like par for the course. And I really do try to not offend people. I think like I don't think anyone is in this world to try and offend anyone. But I think just being more cognizant of that and thinking before I say things, but also like listening to what people are saying so I can respond to that. So.
That's good. Thanks for sharing that. I'll go next. So a couple things. I was talking about the kind of like the avoidance piece of me diving deeper into identities. And I think something that I will love to work on is like, I think through this whole class, like it's been a lot of work based on identities, but I definitely think it has impacted a lot of like being able to dive deeper in my own identities has allowed me to connect deeper with my students, because I can identify more things once I have a better understanding on my own. So to continue to like avoid things, but actually dive deeper into the why do I do these things, or what do I act the way I act? Like why is this piece of my identity like tells me about the way I'm doing things, you know? So just being, I think definitely being more curious about it, and knowing that that's essential in my role in the student affairs world and in the way that I relate with my students. The other piece will be, I talk about just being very defensive about the assumption of my identities. So I think like working on no having those set expectations of people, because that could potentially hurt those relationships. But instead being more like expectant and curious about their identities, I think like that will be the way I would like to work around those relationships. And I think that will alleviate the pressure of like, no, you're supposed to know what my identities are, you know? But instead of just like being able to build those relationships and sit with people in just connecting well, and through that they will understand a little deeper of where I'm coming from and my background, and understand some of those identities, and to feel that desire of being known that we all have. So yeah.
So we can go back in the same order. Once again, I'm just really, I feel like I talked about this before, but I'm just really committed to continue being more comfortable, I guess, with talking about race, just because it's just such an important aspect of identity, and obviously in the work that I do, and keep acknowledging the fact that, you know, I obviously don't know everything. I'm not going to, nobody does. And especially when it comes to this topic, like find other resources to teach about it, to talk about it when in areas and with questions that I'm not comfortable with. And so I guess continuing on that journey that I guess I've started a couple years ago, keep doing that. And then I'm also just want to be very conscious and self-aware about what I say and do around my family and friends, because apparently how I talk about the identity is different than how I talk about it with my students. And I feel like with my students, I feel like I get a better reaction and it's a better approach, whether or not it's just because they're my students and they have to listen to me. That's a different story. But just being very aware of how I approach things, and like, just because, you know, they're my loved ones, they don't have to listen to me, but I want them to listen to me when we talk about identity, because it's really important. It's like everywhere in our world today, the discussions around it. So I would say, once again, like, those are two things I'm just very committed to and glad I'm more aware of them now.
That's completely stopping me. I think the thing for me that I would want to work on is finding that balance of being able to express how I feel and the things I want to say in a way that's not offensive, because I do have that issue of saying things but not realizing that I'm coming off offensive. So working on that, as well as working on, like I said, being more balanced in saying things, listening, and then what's the word? I guess responding based on my understanding of what that person is saying. And I think in that will help me work on being able to have more intentional and more meaningful conversation. Okay.
Awesome. All right. Did anyone have something they wanted to add about that one before we go to the next one?
I'm good.
All right. Okay, next one. Did you actually share something important, personal, or risky, or did you only share superficial information? I would say it really depended on the person I was talking to. So, like you guys, I talked to a couple people I had talked to before, and then I talked to a couple of new people. The people that I had talked to before, I was more willing to share the risky personal information with, versus like the new people I talked to. I was really not willing to share a ton of personal things with them. So when I look at like the personal stuff that I was sharing, or the risky things that I shared, were things that like they didn't know about me, but I knew about myself. One thing that I like don't openly share with people is my mental health struggles, which I really identify as part of my identity, because I grew up in a household that like you just dealt with it on your own. So with the people who like I had already done this activity with, I was able to openly share that with them. While it was risky, they knew me a little bit better. But like I also did this activity with my mom, who my mom obviously knows me probably the best of anyone. But that's something that she doesn't know about me, and I did not share that with her because of the way I was raised. And I almost felt like if I share this with you, I'm letting you down, and I don't want her to feel like a failure because it's nothing my parents did. It's just how I live life. So it's something that I struggled to share with her. But other people, I openly shared that with them. But like something I didn't openly share with some of those other people that I shared with, like people like my mom, was while I seem to live an upper middle class lifestyle, I often live outside of my means to fit in. So while I live in a very Midwest town, I live in a high-end Midwest town. So I live in Carmel. So Carmel, Indiana is like one of the most expensive cities in Indiana to live in. And while you can live there like upper middle class or even lower middle class, I have a lot of friends that are from the Chicago area, so they like grew up with a lot of money, and not that I didn't, but for a long time I like lived outside of my means, which I have always like really identified with. Like, I live within my means. I'm very simplistic. I'm very minimalistic. But I wanted to fit in. So that was really hard for me to share with those people that I thought contributed to that. But so it really just did depend on who I was talking to. I wish I could have been open with all of them in the same way, but even with them all being really close to me, they aren't all privy to everything about my life. So.
Sorry. Yeah, for me, I think, thanks for sharing, Samantha. It was cool hearing about that. I think a lot of it, like what I interact, like who I interact, it's people that I do trust. They're my peers from work. In the organization I work, everyone is super close, and it's very, you do like everyday life and trips and things like that with them. So it just like, we just have grown into trusting a lot, and you get to see a lot of it, professional and personal. So I think it was a little easier to share. And I will say some pretty like, it was like deeper things, but it was very evident. Like similar to Samantha, I think like my journey of mental health, like that's something that people have seen it. You know, it's not something I could hide when you are like 24/7 with your coworkers or 3 weeks traveling with them. Like that's something that you kind of make them a part of. So they have been able to like just witness some of that. So that's the stuff that I was able to share openly about, like that being a part of my identity, or a struggle like fitting in culture in one of the other culture fully. That's something that is also very evident. And I think that was hard to share because I'm the only Ecuadorian in my organization. It's everyone is North American. So it was like hard to share. Of like, some people was very surprised at me being like, oh yeah, this is actually something like I don't fully feel like I fit in North American culture, and I don't fully fit in Ecuadorian culture because I interact with North American culture so much. So I think that was definitely harder to share because people really, I think the fear of the way people will view me or worry about me, of like, oh, like, are you okay? Are you feeling like accepted here? But then I don't know, like the desire to grow in that into like people actually knowing that. So knowing that, how can they support me and invite them into that journey of diving deeper into the identities? I feel like that's been the topic of like even exploring deeper in the Johari window. So I think, yeah, definitely it was a little easier to share because it's people that I have a good base of like trust and honesty. But yeah, that's kind of it.
Thank you for sharing, both of you. Kind of going off of what both of you shared, like I did share some kind of more about my mental health journey. It's one of those things like I don't like to say I keep it hidden because I'm very passionate about like mental health awareness and like talking about it. But it's more one of those things like I'll bring up in one-on-one conversations where I see it's beneficial to share that vulnerability to either help a student or a friend or something. So it's kind of one of those things like I have a hard time sharing about it, but then I don't. It just depends on the situation. And so I kind of open it. Okay, sorry, my cat's getting into my plant. And so it's one of those things like it's something that's a big part of me because I'm very passionate about mental health and like that we should talk about it. But it's hard to share. It's scary to share. Each person kind of takes it differently. I mean, more than anything, I've noticed that like when I bring it up with someone, they're like, "Oh, thank goodness, someone's felt like that too," or "There's someone else like me. I'm not just alone in this." But at least for me, I've gotten a couple of those reactions of like, well, just get out of your head or get over it or like things like that. And those kind of have a hard impact on you, even though you realize, or at least I realized with some of my training background, okay, they just haven't dived. They just put up walls for a lot of their own struggles that they've gone through. So I would say that's probably the hardest thing that I've shared, but it's one of those things that as I've gotten older, I feel like I've become more comfortable with, and I want to be more comfortable with because it's just so important. So yeah.
All right, my turn again. I think I'm like Samantha in the sense that there are certain people I will share certain things with. In the past, I've tried to get out of my comfort zone and I've shared things with people, and they have basically taken them and thrown them back in my face, or they've taken them and basically shared that information with other people who I had no intention of sharing it with. But for those people that I do trust enough to share those things, those important, well, not important, but private things with, it does help because I get to get a different outlook on everything versus everything just being in my head and me being the only person seeing it. Because a lot of times when it's just me or when it's just you, period, looking at something, you're going to always make yourself right. But when I talk to other people, they force me to look at it from different aspects and see where I could have been wrong, where the other part was wrong, and how I could have handled it differently.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. We've kind of already touched on the next question, but we'll see if anyone wants to add anything. Why is it harder to share stuff that's more important to us? I think we all kind of already hit on that. But did anyone have anything they wanted to add?
I just feel like it just makes us more vulnerable. I don't know. It's one of those things like people just have a hard time being vulnerable. Like, and the things that are most important to us, like, are at the core of who we are, and therefore it can be harder to share because you don't know what people's reactions are.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Brown said, like vulnerability is not just showing up; it's showing up when you don't know the outcome. So I think that's why it's hard to share those things because you don't know what people are going to think. So I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think like the more I'm able to interact with the students, the more like wisdom you have of like when you need to share that, because there's some people that I'm like, is it worth even sharing? Like, I'm not gonna open this piece of my heart that is so deep with someone that's not gonna have empathy, one, and two, that it's not even gonna hold it safely for me. But I think like a lot of the time, Lindsay, what you were saying, like with the students, like there are moments that I feel like is that moment that you're able to share and be vulnerable with them about, like, especially mental health. Like, I feel like so common, like now with my students, that it's like the moment that I'm able to tell them like, oh yeah, that's something I struggle with too, and I'm in the process of it. There's just this wall that is broken down for them of being like, oh, me too. Like, so I think it even creates a deeper connection that you get to mentor and walk with these students in their journey of college or high school. So it's just cool to know, like, man, that's actually like vulnerability is such a powerful tool in our careers.
Absolutely. I feel like, and I've always felt weird about this, but like I'm more willing to be vulnerable with a student than I am to be with a peer or like my family. Especially my family. Like, I feel like they're just very judgmental. Maybe that's just my family, but like I'm very willing to be vulnerable with a student, and maybe that's because I see it as a learning experience for them. But like I was just vulnerable with a student the other day, and now that student feels like they have a safe space. So I would definitely agree that it opens that door, especially with students. So. All right. This is the last
one. Run and grab my charger really quick. My computer's about to die.
Oh, no.
So we only have one question left, and we're like still an hour from the time. But I really am not concerned. We're not turning the video in, so I feel like we're okay. But
are we sure we're not turning the video in? I thought we were.
Well, no. I did think, there is an assignment that says Johari window 2.
Okay, so we do turn it in?
I think so, but I honestly think like they wanted us to. We've had good conversations.
Yeah,
we can't force another hour out of us. Like,
I totally agree.
Yeah, totally. We're good.
We could try and get creative.
Also,
but...
we all do have lives. Everybody has a life.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page with the timing.
Yeah, for real.
Okay.
Thank you so much for willing to do it today, you guys. I'm heading to the jungle, like middle of nowhere tomorrow. So I won't be back till Sunday. So thank you.
No, I totally get it. So
no worries.
Okay, one question left. This one could take a while. I don't know. How will what you learn through this activity shift how you enter spaces like work, social interactions with friends or strangers, and family, home, etc.? I think like I kind of touched on this, and it's just being more cognizant. Like I'm gonna be more intentional about what I say and how I interact with people, because I really was unaware that that's the perception I gave. And I think now that I know about it, I can really think about it. Like I had this conversation on Sunday with somebody, with one of the people that I shared with, and since then, I have been like thinking about it, and right now it's like very like on my mind, like, okay, you need to be intentional with how you interact with people, and you need to not give this perception that like you're being defensive and things. But I think the more that I do it, the more naturally it's gonna come. Like in a couple of weeks, I'm not gonna have to think about being intentional with how I interact with people. It's just gonna happen. So I think just that's kind of how the shift I'm going to make is being intentional, thinking about what other people perceive and such. But yeah.
I think for me, definitely just walking in with no expectations, but being expectant for those conversations, what conversations will look like with people. Once again, my worlds are very mixed. So work and life and social, it's a lot with people from work. So just entering those conversations with expectancy more than like the expectations of like, this is what I want you to know about me and my identities. I think the other thing, like we were just talking about vulnerability, I think just like seeing that, I think a lot of the time vulnerability can seem, especially in the culture I grew up, as like weakness. Like you don't let people see that like deeper side of you, because that's something they could use to attack you or to put you down or bring you down or all those things. But instead, like use it in the spaces I enter as a tool to connect with people deeper than just like the surfacey level relationships around. And the third, along the lines with Samantha, about intentionality, like intentionality about the conversations I have with people, intentionality about me growing as a person in my own understanding, in order to relate with others and dive deeper into understanding them as well. I think those three things, like vulnerability, being expectant, and intentionality.
Well, first of all, I agree with everything both of you have said. So I'm going to try to expand on different things, because those are all things I was thinking of. I would say, well, once again, I'll just reiterate a little bit of what I've talked about before, is just how I guess interact with more my family and friends on some of these topics, and being, I guess, a little bit more giving them more free space for the process of understanding identity. that I give my students and probably strangers. And so that's one aspect. The other thing I was thinking of is, social interactions with students. I feel like I'm more comfortable being vulnerable and, like Michaela, what you were saying, being intentional on creating something a little deeper when the situation fits for you to be a little bit more vulnerable with, say, a student. Where I have a hard time with, I was just thinking of when it comes to coworkers, of being vulnerable. At least at my last institution I worked at, like, I was the youngest person. I was closer to students' ages than I was, I started working there when I was 23, than I was to the next person that was closest to my age was my boss, who was 30. So I had a really hard time, I guess, being very intentional, opening up and vulnerable when it came to, like, staff meetings and committee meetings, when we're trying to all get to know each other, because I just felt like I maybe connected more to students because I was one not too long ago. So that's something that I feel like I can just be very more aware of, and the fact that, like, kind of work through the fact that that makes me a little bit more uncomfortable, but it's okay to be uncomfortable. So yeah.
My turn?
Yeah, go for it.
I think for me, the thing that I would focus on the most when it comes to interacting with people, interacting with coworkers, would be understanding that every opinion or every idea, everything you say has some form of importance to it. I think a lot of times I think that I'm not as informed, experienced, or anything like that when it comes to the different people I talk to. So that plays into me keeping a lot of things to myself when it comes to engaging work and engaging with people. And on top of that, also working on when I do actually engage, being aware of my mind wandering to something else when I should be listening.
That's good.
I appreciate everybody sharing, and like we said earlier, like, it is nice to put a little bit more faces and, like, the human behind these conversations and discussions, especially when we're talking about very personal, very tough conversations that you don't necessarily have on a day-to-day.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely appreciate you guys sharing, and I know it's not easy. So, and thanks for making the time. I know that we did a really short notice, but I'm glad that we were able to get everyone in here before Sunday. We did make it work. So,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of homework for this week, so I'm glad we're getting ahead of this.
yes, absolutely. Does anyone have anything else they want to add before I press stop?
I don't think so. So then, Samantha, will you submit
I'm not
this?
sure. I'm going to press stop, and then
Okay.
I'm going to see what happens.
Okay.